We're going to talk about anxiety today, which I think probably everybody in this room has touched at some point in their life, either themselves or with somebody they love. And, you know, the stats are sort of staggering. 30% of adult Americans suffer with some form of not just I'm stressed at work or something like that, but real legit anxiety, to say nothing of our teens and our adult children and children in general, and particularly following on the heels of this pandemic. You know, more specifically, I'm thrilled, as you saw this clip, we're talking about the use and misuse of Xanax, which, you know, is so widely available on social media, Instagram. It's just, you know, this is the subject of this Netflix doc, which Take Your Pills, co-produced by Christina Schwarzenegger and, of course, mother, Maria Shriver, but really it's Christina's brainchild, and the two of them came together, and this is the second, hopefully, of many to come, which we're thrilled to see. And then legendary Dr. Julie Holland, who is, I love that, you know, you sit at the intersection of so much in the field of psychology, psychiatry, and then emerging practices, that more sort of revolutionary practices on the board of MAPS, which we'll get to a little bit later. Christina, this is your brainchild, and the first doc really came out of your experience with you know, going to college and Adderall, and seeing the overuse and misuse of Adderall, and you know, I think this second documentary really tracks the misuse of Xanax in some cases, and then actually the really good applications of Xanax, and you do a beautiful job of telling the whole picture. So tell us how this started. How did you come to this idea? What made you want to tackle this?
Yeah, so the first one was obviously focused on Adderall, and that one sprouted from a personal experience. But really, so this kind of felt like a natural evolution when we were focusing on stimulants, to then also focus on anti-anxiety medication. And I think a few of my goals for the film was, one, for people not to feel alone. That was a huge thing for me when I was struggling coming off of Adderall, and really for people to kind of understand that they're not the only person experiencing it. And I think another thing that I really want people to understand is to mostly to gain more knowledge about the subject, to kind of, you know, feel like they've, you know, have some educational tools so that they can understand the short-term and also many of the long-term effects of being on these medications. And also there are many unknowns still about that, so just being aware of that. And another thing that I really wanted people to do is to, which I think you did such a great job of explaining, is to really understand that there are alternatives. You know, medication isn't always a one-size-fits-all approach for everyone. Everyone's unique, so for a lot of people it's incredibly helpful, and then for other people, exploring other options like what you touched on in the film is also, there are many resources available out there.
And you have, you spoke about your own anxiety, and that you had never really identified it, but when asked by somebody, you said, actually, yeah. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, I like to think of myself as a pretty relaxed person. But yeah, no, I've definitely struggled with anxiety. I think it's also, one of those things with ADD or ADHD, it's they kind of get intertwined a lot. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of struggling with trying to define whether it's like you're having trouble concentrating, sitting still, or if it's anxiety or what's going on. But I think, like many people, I've struggled with kind of day-to-day anxiety, existential anxiety, things like that, which I think are, you know, really common.
Julie, you tell us, what is the difference between sort of garden variety stress, anxiety, and one that rises to the level of intervention?
Yeah, well, I think like everything else in psychiatry, it's on a spectrum. If you're not anxious, you're not paying attention. Like, there's a lot of stuff to be worried about. And you have to, it really sort of comes down to, is the anxiety getting in the way of you getting out of bed, taking care of yourself, taking a shower, eating, you know, if you have a job, are you making it to work, how are your relationships? So it's really, to me, when you want to step in with interventions is if there's a dysfunction. Because there are real ramifications of being hypervigilant that are positive. You know, and I mean, sometimes if you're a journalist or a writer, you want to get every detail. You know, you want to turn over every rock. And so to have a little bit of hypervigilance means you're going to do a better job with your story. So, and I know it's really tricky with ADD and anxiety because if you're really anxious, you're kind of scattered and you can't focus. And when you have ADD, you're kind of scattered and you can't focus. So they can look the same. And when you're in fight or flight, your social skills are terrible. You know, you're curt with people and you don't have time. And so your impulse control is not that great. And that kind of looks like ADD too. And then the meds can make you feel anxious, especially if there are too many of them.
Maria, you speak about, there are lots of things to be anxious about these days. As you have raised 4 children, living in this moment, talk to us a little bit about that. You have a perspective on this.
Well, first of all, I just want to say I'm really happy to be here, happy to see so many people got up on a Sunday morning with daylight savings. I was like, I never get up at this hour for anything. So I want to thank you for getting up, showing up, and being here to talk about this very real and I think issue that's very much of the moment and that crosses generations. The thing that I really admired about Christina and admire about so many young people is they're talking about mental health challenges in a way that my generation never did.
Yeah.
My generation was, don't talk about anything, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, therapy's only for people who are suicidal, and that's it. And I think that this is a conversation that is and should be happening in every home, every business. It should be a political issue as well. And so I really applauded her when she said, you know, I think we should be doing a film on Adderall. Millions of kids are on Adderall. People who don't need to be on Adderall are on Adderall because they want to keep up with everybody who's on Adderall.
Right.
And I think the first film was so successful, obviously Netflix said, we want to turn this into a series. And that so many people who were on Adderall then couldn't sleep, were too anxious to sleep, so Xanax was a great next step. And I think I've learned a lot from this conversation about different forms of how we learn, how we pay attention, what are the long-term effects of medication. You know, people say like, oh, if your child is struggling in school, put them on Adderall and help them, but then they go away to college and you have no more control, and all of a sudden one subscription for a small amount becomes much bigger, and then it's combined with Xanax, and sometimes that Xanax now is laced with fentanyl and it's combined with alcohol. So there's a lot going on for people who are parents. There's a lot going on for people who are in workplaces that are operating 24/7, really, you know, in the workplace, and how do you manage boundaries? So I think all of these are in one big mixing bowl. Yeah. And I think that's what this film tried to talk about, you know, what happens when you take Xanax? What happens when you're working 24/7? How do you have boundaries, and what else is out there that you yourself can employ for your own mental health, your own emotional, spiritual, and physical well-being, which is something I think that's the responsibility of each and every one of us. But it's also kind of our collective society's responsibility to make it okay to talk about.
Absolutely. And I think in the film, you did a really wonderful job of tracking, you know, several subjects and people who had different responses. Take us through that, because it really painted such a well-rounded picture of how people can use it effectively and how difficult it can be for people to wean themselves off if they overuse it or use it for long periods of time.
Yeah, I mean, our goal also of the film was to really also ignite a conversation around the subject. And in order to do that, you have to, you know, give a wide range of characters who are using it or have used it and have come off of it, or, you know, just a different range of experiences. Because the reality is, like you were saying about it being a spectrum, it is a spectrum of the way that people use it, how people find it incredibly helpful, because it is a life-saving medication for a lot of people. And then, just as with anything, people also abuse it. So kind of having a spectrum of different characters to really, you know, do a deep dive into what's going on right now, what's been going on in the past, how people have been using it, in order to really ignite these conversations about these kind of struggles, and also when we look towards the future, kind of what that picture may look like. So that you were saying kind of, having these kind of conversations in your household, at school, at work,
Right.
kind of covering the people is,
Yeah.
I was really struck in the film, and I think in general, about the long-term effects of medication. So often I've talked to a lot of people say, I need a Xanax to get on an airplane.
Right.
Or I need a Xanax to deal with an exam or something, that it's a momentary thing. But to see people who have started with it and then they turn around and it's 2 years, 5 years, 10 years later, and the struggle to get off of it is real. And the other thing that I thought was super interesting, which is, once again, to the spectrum point, that some people are like, I had no problem getting off, and other people, it's a life and death thing. And I think that also opens up this whole conversation. You talk to certain people when they get pregnant. Some people sail through it, other people are in bed. Some people sail through menopause, other people are suicidal. Some people can get on a medication and get off with no problem. Other people have real life and death struggles. So I think that just understanding, being sympathetic or empathetic to that all of us are different in our brains and in our bodies and in our health journeys. And so understanding that what is easy for you might not be easy for somebody else is also part of this larger education, I believe.
Absolutely. Julie, tell us under what circumstances you would prescribe Xanax or any benzo versus an SSRI.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question, and I would say that my behavior sort of changed over the years. I've been prescribing since the mid-'90s, and when I started, I really had to do a lot of hand-holding with people and explaining, like, oh, you have these symptoms, and there's medicine that can help you, and, we were all fed this line of you have a chemical imbalance, and people seem to be comfortable with that, and but then flash forward 10, 20 years later, I never have to hold somebody's hand or destigmatize. They come to me, their therapist thinks they need meds, and so they're asking me questions like, should I take Effexor or Wellbutrin? Or, I have a friend who says this is the right medicine, or these combinations. So people are getting a lot of messages. I mean, there's direct-to-consumer advertising that really sort of preys on women, and I wrote about this quite a bit in a book called Moody Bitches. So it is a joke, and I appreciate you get that. The subtitle of Moody Bitches is the truth about the drugs you're taking, the sex you're not having, the sleep you're missing, and what's really making you feel crazy. And what I talked about in terms of what's making us feel crazy is this sort of disconnection from each other, from our bodies, from nature. And that disconnection is giving you a real level of unsettledness. And we're supposed to be social. We're social primates. We do better in groups. The more isolated we are, the more we're going to be in fight or flight. And the more you're in fight or flight, the more you feel anxious. So my most recent book, Good Chemistry, is all about how to go from fight or flight to the other thing. And the other thing is called the parasympathetic nervous system. So fight or flight is sympathetic. Parasympathetic is where you can rest, digest, and it's the only time where your body can really repair itself. It's also the only time where you can repair social relationships. And the more you're hooked in socially, the better you feel. So in 95, to get back to your point, I would be like, okay, you're anxious, there's 2 ways we can do this. I can give you a low dose of an antidepressant, which happens to really help with anxiety, or I can give you a benzo like Xanax, or there's a whole family of benzos that Xanax is in that are like a Band-Aid that will just immediately calm you down.
But for short-term use, right?
Short-term use, and the downside of things like Xanax or Klonopin or Valium, that whole family, one downside is it kind of turns your brain into Teflon a little bit. Things don't stick very well. The more you take, the more this becomes an issue. You get a little disinhibited, the way if you had a couple glasses of wine, you might say something to your friend or boss that you wouldn't. So the disinhibition, a little bit of sedation, the Teflon brain, not great side effects. The truth is the low-dose SSRIs are kind of a better deal if you're anxious day in and day out. The big issue with Xanax is that the more you take, the more you take. If you take it sporadically, when you fly, when you have to go over a bridge, it's not ever really going to be an issue. But if you're taking it when you're anxious and you take it on a regular basis, you can pretty much be guaranteed that you're going to start to get anxious before your next dose is due. If you take it every day at 4 o'clock, you're going to start feeling it at 2:30.
What about
3
immunity?
o'clock.
Do you build up?
So
do you build up a
I wouldn't
tolerance?
call it tolerance. I have some people who've been on a low dose forever. They take one a day or they take one at night. It doesn't ever seem to be an issue. Some of it's placebo.
I was just
I
gonna
don't
ask
see
that.
a lot of tolerance. I do see issues with the withdrawal. If you abruptly stop it, you're going to have a problem. There's also something unique to Xanax, which is rebound anxiety. Most of the benzos, they come up, you feel less anxious. They start to taper off. You feel okay, you go to sleep, you go about your day. There's something about Xanax that you feel less anxious, and it's a little bit of you really feel less anxious, but when you come down, you kind of end up a little lower than where you started. And that's called rebound anxiety, and that really is a setup for wanting another Xanax in the same way that when you eat a Dorito, and it tastes great, maybe, but toward the end of that Dorito, when the Dorito's swallowed, you get a funky little taste in your mouth that the only thing that's going to really fix that is another Dorito.
But is it-
I honestly think of Xanax that way.
Before you go into
But isn't it-
self-loathing.
I think what's also super interesting that these films talk about, one is so many of them are marketed and geared to women.
Yeah.
And I think when you look at the Adderall film and when you look at Xanax, it's really important to look at that these pharmaceutical companies zeroed in on women. And I think that that's a really important thing to take note of. Why is that? Why did they do that? Why did that stick? And also that we don't have long-term studies on any of the drugs that most people are taking. So I think it's very different, once again, if you're taking some, and this is something that, you were talking a lot about, that we don't really know, and a lot of people are, especially women, taking birth control pills, and they may move on to SSRIs, then they move on to Xanax, and they may move on to all sorts of other things, and particularly women at midlife, it actually might be perimenopause and menopause, and an SSRI could do what Xanax does. But I think one of, which I always come back to, Christina, was like, they never told me this about Adderall. They never tell you this about Xanax. And they give it to you once, the pill, and then you just keep coming back. And very often the doctor just says, you want another prescription? And they sign it. So this is a larger...
Yeah, I feel like you were actually incredibly unique in being a deprescribing psychiatrist. It's I feel like every psychiatrist that I've ever seen, in the past or even have heard of, it's kind of like a more, which I think is like an interesting concept for people to even understand that there are psychiatrists out there who work at deprescribing.
There are, and there will be more and more. And
why? Why will
poor me. I was just talking about this yesterday at another panel, but I've been a little ahead of the curve for 30-something years. In the mid-'80s, I was really pushing for condom distribution and clean needles when we heard about HIV, and harm reduction really wasn't a thing yet. And then when I wrote Moody Bitches, I really focused on this issue of how big pharma totally targets women, especially after 9/11. Oh, are you anxious? Take this pill. Are you having trouble sleeping? Take this pill. And it's like, yes, I'm anxious. We just lost a couple of buildings in the city.
But women are raising kids. They're working. They're taking care of aging parents. And they have a perfect storm a lot of the time. But as Christina just said, most doctors just say, take it again. Take it again.
What I want
they have pressure to do so because of ratings, right? Then people will rate them not unfavorably.
So first of all, I wrote about this in Moody Bitches, that the quickest, easiest way to get somebody out of your office is to hand them a prescription pad. This used to be paper before electronics. Be like, here you go. And then it's like, this is your parting gift. It's time to go now. And they get their coat and leave, and you have the next person. And some patients will be disappointed if they didn't have that ritual at the end of here's your prescriptions. But also, keep in mind, we live in a capitalist society. Medicine is a for-profit industry. And for people who are trying to, get them in, get them out, the same way that a restaurant is trying to get you in, get you out, and upsell you, and do you want a drink, and do you want coffee? If they give you something that you're going to like and come back in a month and ask for more of, then you're a regular customer.
Yes,
and that,
exactly.
I'm sorry, but that is the sad truth. That I'm not saying all doctors, but there is that element that,
the
the society that we
transactional
live in,
element,
it is transactional.
Christina, I feel like you have touched on also just something about your generation and this kind of, you talk about sort of this idea of needing a quick fix, even, this is true of all generations to the point of the transaction. But I think you, with Adderall and then Xanax, that there is, we have this kind of dopamine feedback loop of our, our phones and our disconnection with nature and all this other kind of stuff. You speak to that, about, having been in college and just your age group in general. Tell us a little bit about
it's definitely something I have to say I'm really concerned about, not only for my generation, but I think for future generations. Just the thought or the idea of, telling someone to meditate for 30 days, I think is like for a lot of people really not appealing. Right. Or telling them like you have to make these huge lifestyle changes in order to help with maybe like depression or anxiety. It's for a lot of people who are used to this like now instant gratification, I think it's not appealing. And so they would rather maybe in a lot of instances take a medication just to kind of immediately get that help. And I mean, I even see it with my niece today who, is always like video, and I'm like, I'll take it away, and it's just like the end of the world.
Right.
It's like now, I need a video now, I need this now. It's a completely
and I'm
different.
Used to getting it now.
Yeah, and so if I'm even seeing this in my generation, it really concerns me personally just about like the kids and future generations to come. Because the idea, again, I think it's also this whole idea of sitting with, I'm a huge advocate for boredom because I think it's, a lot of creativity comes during that time. But when I think back to my childhood and I'm like, if I had cell service at my house, I wouldn't have been like drawing.
Right.
If I, had all these, if I constantly had an iPad or if I constantly had something to turn to, I wouldn't have had these like dress up moments with my sister or anything like that. So I think that it all kind of, it's a bigger conversation, but I think that it all kind of plays in together. Just the way that we use our time, kind of really nurturing boredom in, future generations to kind of give rise to kind of creativity, which I think is incredibly needed.
I saw you interviewed, you had switched schools at some point in your high school career, and you spoke about just sort of the anxiety around, kind of staying in a certain kind of school and then moving to a different school and then the experience of going to college and sort of getting back into that anxiety cycle of having to sort of, draw inside the lines. Tell us a little bit about that because that actually speaks to, and then you got off the Adderall.
Yeah, I think like many kids, I learned differently. I was a huge visual learner, which is also why I love documentaries. I'm better able to retain the information that way. And the school I had grown up going to from K through 6 was super traditional. Mm-hmm. And they taught one way and was not the way that I learned best. Mm-hmm. And
which is true for so many kids.
Yeah. Right? And so for me, I think that created a lot of shame personally, just kind of, growing up with ideas of like, what's wrong with me? Am I stupid? Am I this? And really going to a different school, which I decided to transition to for 7th grade, which was an incredibly creative school, really I felt like opened up my learning experience, opened up my personality in ways that I would have never been able to access had I been at a different school. And then going to college, again, I went to a pretty academic, more traditional setting.
Yep.
And that's kind of, I think, what had really fueled my use of Adderall, trying to really just kind of, my therapist always explained to me, like a circle kind of fitting in a square peg. It's like it just doesn't work sometimes. Mm-hmm. But, that was my own personal struggle and journey with it. And it's honestly, it's a lot of the shame still exists within myself today. Oh, I can't sit down and read a book like a girlfriend can. Like, what's wrong with me? Like those kinds of things, which I think perpetuate a lot of anxiety and depression. It's this whole kind of...
And just that, as you were talking about before, the sort of conflation of those symptoms between ADHD and anxiety, it's sometimes hard to tease those apart. And I think that they are probably sort of comorbid symptoms.
Yeah.
That's a question for you.
Well, everything has the potential to be comorbid. There are lots of people who have more than one diagnosis, but the truth is that, nobody fits in one box very easily.
Right.
And the only reason why the diagnoses are much use is that the insurance companies insist on them for billing. So a lot of psychiatrists aren't that interested in, what your label is. But if you go on TikTok, people love having a label. They like to identify as, somebody on the spectrum or with Tourette's or any number of things. And there really is less and less stigma, I think, about like having a psychopharm or having a source for psychopharmaceuticals. One thing we should mention is Xanax is really cheap. You know, I see the prices when I order things, and I'm just like, that's dirt cheap. You know, a few dollars for 30 or 60 pills, like, compared to a lot of other medicines, definitely compared to stimulants. Same thing with opiates. You know, they're very, very cheap. And we had an issue with opiates where we were sort of encouraged by the drug companies to prescribe them, and they were incredibly cheap and plentiful. People got very comfortable taking them. Then all of a sudden we worried we were prescribing too much, pulled it away. People are buying on the street. Streets got fentanyl. Same thing happens with Xanax. You know, if the doctor decides that they don't want to give you anymore and you decide that you still need it and you are getting it from not a pharmacy, it is now like a life or death situation. Because
I think this is really important because people are buying Xanax with fentanyl on social media. And that is, you know, obviously causing tremendous...
Our drug supply is poisoned. Our underground drug supply is completely poisoned, which means that we're really obligated to prescribe and to de-prescribe. And there's all kinds of ways to de-prescribe. And just being in therapy can help you need less meds. You know, talking to somebody regularly, and preferably a couple times a week, because when it's once a week, you're just kind of catching them up on what you did for a week. But you got to dig down to where you got hurt when you were 3 and 13.
But a lot of people can't afford that. You know, a lot of people are in jobs that they can't afford that.
It's true that psychotherapy is expensive, and you know there are online programs where you can get medication and where you can get psychotherapy virtually for much cheaper than face-to-face, if that's an option for people. Anybody who has health insurance can argue that if they have somebody in network, they can be reimbursed. So there are people in network on these online forums. So I have no affiliation with places like BetterHelp or TalkSense, and there are other programs like that where, because ever since COVID, people got very comfortable doing telehealth, so you have more access than you used to. But you know, I want to talk about breathing for a minute.
I was just going to ask you, what are the other interventions?
Just breathing through your nose is going to help you. Just shut your mouth and breathe in and out through your nose, and it will calm you. Like, that's number one. I'm not going to demonstrate. Just listen. 2 ears, 1 mouth. I'm talking. No. So just breathing in and out through your nose helps calm you. If you're really panicking, if you block your right nostril and breathe in and out through your left nostril, that will calm you. If you're clogged up or you have a sinus issue, you can breathe in and out through your right nostril. That also works. But
so
the best thing,
walk us through why.
Left nostril breathing. So it really comes down to this issue of the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And when you're panting and you're breathing in and out through your mouth, your body thinks that there is danger. And when you're breathing in and out through your nose, it basically tells your body that you are not in fight or flight and that you're in parasympathetic, right? That's where you sleep better, digest, your body repairs itself, you have social repair. This is an anti-inflammatory state, which we all want anti-inflammatory activities. Yoga, meditation, being in nature, having an orgasm, cuddling your pet. Those are all things that can put you in parasympathetic. This is about oxytocin, right? Oxytocin will not only sort of calm you, but it makes you open to social connection, and you trust people more, and you're more vulnerable. And that trust leads to connection, leads to bonding, leads to cuddling, leads to orgasm, leads to delivery, leads to nursing. That's oxytocin, oxytocin, oxytocin. It's like it's kind of everywhere you want to be. And it is the opposite of adrenaline and cortisol, which is what we have in fight or flight.
So that's another thing that I want to talk about. Just this notion in our culture of always being on, and you know, Red Bull and Silicon Valley, you know, and people up all night coding, and this sort of glamorization of the busy life. I mean, it's the first thing that we say. How's everything? Oh, I'm just super busy. Good, super busy.
Yeah,
you know,
crazy busy.
I'm going to start with you because I feel like you'll have something to say about
Are you
this. Does that feel like it's gotten more that way? It seems to me that it's gotten more that way. And yet, as we have greater receptivity to breathing and yoga and meditation and mindfulness and all these things that I think, you know, we get better at over time. Like, what's your perspective on this?
Listening, stepping back, I think this is a great, what's actually happening right here is a great antidote to anxiety. Mm-hmm. This is community. People are with one another. This is what this is what heals people. Other human beings in connection, talking to friends, sharing, feeling seen, feeling heard. I was raised by two really busy people who changed the world, and they weren't on one device. They weren't, they came home, they played in nature, and they changed the world. I think, you know, I've learned a lot from Christina about focus on me, put the phone down, let's turn the things off, let's play a game, let's be together, let's be a family, let's be in community, let's be bored. And I think that, you know, we're not at a competition to out-busy one another, out-compete, because we're all going to the same place.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
We're all going to the same place. And I can tell you, I'm much older than probably anybody in this room, and I've kind of checked things off of my list, goals that maybe many of you had. Oh, I thought if I wrote a best-selling book, I would feel X. If I anchored a news show, I would feel Y. If I got a marriage like this, all of these things. And they were instant dopamine hits, but they didn't make me feel what I thought. And what made me feel and what makes me feel whole, happy, content, proud, is being in community with another person, being here, talking to somebody, sharing something with somebody else. That's the thing nobody's talking about. They're telling you, get on the magazine, make $1 million that you'll lose overnight when the bank crashes, right? What won't crash on you is this person.
Yeah.
What won't crash on you is that friend that got up and that will help you in the middle of the night. That's what we need to be investing. That's the dream. That's the goal. That's what's going to make you feel better. And I have to say, you know, talking across generations, talking, like having her advocate, you know, I need something different than you're giving your sister or your brother. And look, there's this whole other way out there of the world, you know, look at it. And so I think talking to people in different generations, as I said, it's, I run an office where there's people of multi-generations. Yeah. It's great to have friends in other generations, everybody.
Yeah.
I agree.
You really, I did too, because a lot of what I spoke, you know, when I had struggles in school and stuff, I spoke to you and actually Dad both, and you guys were like, I had the exact same issues. Like, I didn't feel super smart in my school. I felt like I had a different learning style. Like, there is so much to learn when you integrate different generations together. Even just speaking to, you know, Christopher, who's in Gen Z, it's like, to me, it's a whole different world even, you know? So it's, I think it's really, there is a incredible source and well of knowledge that can be exchanged when you come together, not only in a community, but also across generations. Yeah. And actually take the time to sit and listen to other people. I think it's some of the best gifts that we can give each other and future generations too.
It was interesting. When we got here yesterday, we came up and there was a long line. We were going to get a coffee, and there was like, I don't know, hundreds of people in a line. And I was like, what's going on here? And they're like, some girl from TikTok is coming to teach us how to be an influencer. I was like, oh, wow. And we went and got a coffee, and it came out, and a bunch of the girls said, why aren't you speaking at something like this? I'm like, nobody would invite me and the girl was like, but we could learn a lot more from you than from somebody who's our same age in TikTok. And I'm like, yeah, that's a good point. And I could learn from you, but we don't think that way. So when you're in an office, and think about that person who's your mother's age or your father's age, or invite across generations, because that's how we learn and grow, and that's how we reduce our anxiety, because we're like, wow, it was terrible in the 60s too. Yeah, it was. Yeah. You know, the whole world was burning. Yeah, it did, you know, but it turns out it didn't, you know? Right. So there's some kind of, my kids will often say like, what's happening? What's happening? And I'm like, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. So.
Julie, you are obviously, you're on the board of MAPS. Tell us a little bit about where you're seeing the future of plant medicine, psychedelics, as an intervention for
Yeah. Did you see? I just looked at
Anxiety.
the clock. I'm like, how much time do I have? There's a lot.
We're
So,
gonna open it up to questions though in a few minutes. So.
I'm a medical advisor for a group called the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, and MAPS has been heralding MDMA, methylene dioxymethamphetamine, better known as ecstasy or Molly, through the FDA process so that it can be approved for post-traumatic stress disorder. I also advise a couple different companies, one cannabis, one psychedelics, about like where to invest. Sort of, they're like hedge funds. I'm on the scientific advisory board of quite a few companies that are involved in psychedelics and a few less that are involved in cannabis. But I am interested in using these alternative therapies, not just to spot treat anxiety or depression, but as part of like an overall wellness strategy. You know, this parasympathetic is the anti-inflammatory place you want to be. And cannabis, CBD, and psilocybin mushrooms, and ayahuasca, and a few other psychedelics are potent anti-inflammatory actors. So for your body, they're actually good for you. And then a lot of us have trauma that needs to be processed. And when you're taking Xanax and you're taking antidepressants, and even if you're in a little bit of therapy, if you're not really digging down to where you got hurt and how it molded your personality, and sorry to tell you, but where your parents got hurt and where your grandparents got hurt, and if there's a Holocaust survivor in your family, their epigenetics is a real thing, and trauma gets handed down. And you know, I have patients who go off to have an ayahuasca circle in Costa Rica, and I'm like, they come back, how was it? And they're like, I didn't even get to my stuff. I had to work through all the Holocaust stuff. And I was like, damn, who knew? And they said, yeah, the people down there say that happens a lot. So we carry trauma in our bodies, you know, and little things, big things. A lot of us had sort of, you know, middle school social trauma that makes us act certain ways in groups. We feel better when we're hooked in, when we're connected one-on-one with a family and a multi-generational community, which my husband Jeremy and I are really lucky that we have got friends who are older, younger. We've got friends with babies. Babies are a great drug, oxytocin bombs. You hold their baby, they go get to play with their friends for a minute, everybody's happy. You know, it's great to have multi-generational living and communities. This is gonna sound corny, but like love is a renewable resource. We can make more and more and more. It's not a pie where there isn't enough for everybody. And the more people putting into the middle of the pot, the more there is for everybody. And you know, we host these potlucks with our friends. Everybody brings enough food for everybody, and so there's tons of food. It's not that hard to share and feed everybody, and it really does a little bit come down to this capitalism and communalism. I'm not saying communism or socialism or any bad words, but like there's something besides. I would put capitalism over here in the fight or flight side. You know, there's a different way of living where it's not about working 16 hours a day, and it's about work-life balance, and it's about how much money do you really need. Right. That goes in the parasympathetic anti-inflammatory side. You know, to be less stressed, breathing through our noses, exhales longer than inhales. That helps a lot. That's why chanting, singing, playing the trumpet, those things are gonna calm you down.
Humming.
Big inhale, slow exhale, everything through the nose, shut your mouth. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to keep anxiety down that aren't daily dose.
Right.
And that aren't cannabis and cannabinoids and psychedelics. But I'm really interested in these alternative therapies. I think they have a lot of promise. I think microdosing is a real thing. There's certain cannabinoids like CBG, I think is going to be a big thing.
I think people feel like it's, I'm not, you know, it's a drug, you know, and they don't realize that plant medicine is medicine. It's all medicine, right?
Yeah, well, like
It depends where you're getting it. It depends
Of
on
course.
the environment. So
Of course, but if it's, you know, and
I mean,
as these
and-
things become regulated, people will feel a little safer experimenting.
So right now,
but it's all medicine.
they're not FDA, you know, MDMA for PTSD is not yet FDA approved, but it will be. In about a year, maybe two. Psilocybin mushrooms for depression will very likely be FDA approved in the next year or two. So these things really are coming.
Totally.
And
I want to leave time for questions, so hold on one, because you're going to be
2:30 today,
asked
I'll
questions.
talk more about this.
Perfect. Do we have mics circulating? Because I want to make sure we only have 5 minutes, and I know we're going to have.
Hi, everyone. Oh, wow, that was loud. Hi, I'm Neha. First of all, thank you so much for having this panel and talking about these really important issues, especially you, Julie. I'm 37 years old, and I've been trying to understand my body a little better, but you won't believe this, and I wonder if the audience has heard this too, but I was literally told by multiple OBGYNs that I can't know anything about my fertility, about my hormones, because I'm not trying to get pregnant. And they're like, come back to us when I know. So anyway, it's been a journey. And I guess my question to you is, I guess in this generation where there's so much information from all these different people, some self-appointed experts, some actual experts who, in your own, from your own experiences, who give us professional opinions that are really not in line with how we should think about our health. Where does one turn to in this era of like crisis experts? So that's my question. But also, a little plug for me since I have the mic. I'm actually starting a company to help promote intergenerational, cross-cultural communication in kids and their families. So, and I have these postcards. I'd like to give it to you before y'all leave because I know you're busy. But just want to throw that in because everything you said about building community connections is so important, especially for future generations, like you mentioned.
Well,
but yes,
I think it is
experts.
important to mention the whole hormone thing. When I focused on this in Moody Bitches quite a bit, and I taught. There's a whole chapter on perimenopause, and there's chapters on getting pregnant, and it's a lot about oxytocin. And it kind of sucks that no one is going to give you hormones unless it's in the service of creating a baby. I have lots of issues with that. Women are second-class citizens in medicine, from research to practice to everything else. We're not taken seriously. Our complaints aren't heard. We're not working up to the same extent that men are. And a lot of the medical research only happens on men and not women. And women are cyclical, and that's why they don't like to do medical research, because there's a little bit more variables. Most of us have hormonal shifts and behavioral changes from those hormonal shifts. In case no one told you, estrogen is a stress hormone. The more estrogen in your system, the more you're like, it's cool, whatever. I mean, it's kind of a little bit like Xanax. It helps you be resilient to stress. And one of the reasons why you feel kind of overwhelmed and like you just can't kind of handle everything that you could handle a week ago is when you get toward that PMS part, you've got less estrogen. Estrogen and serotonin are somewhat yoked. They kind of go up and down together. If you're on SSRIs and you're on the pill, things are not going to bother you very much. You've got high estrogen, high serotonin. You're going to be kind of easy breezy. You also are not going to be that interested in mating or having a baby. So that could be an issue. Find another GYN. In terms of reliable medical, drholland.com is where you can find a lot of information. My books, the last book was Good Chemistry. The one before that is Moody Bitches. Both of those books have huge sections at the end, a glossary, an index, all kinds of notes. Where did I learn this? So you can go to the primary sources. So because of COVID, we have more access to better doctors all over the country now. You don't necessarily have to see the people in your town, So sometimes you got to get online to get a good doctor.
We have mics here.
Hi, my name is Julie, and congratulations, this is an amazing panel. I have a question for Christina and for Maria. I have two teenagers that are in a public high school, and I'm curious about your thoughts on how we can create more policy or curriculum change in the health and PE classes for kids, that we can begin to better educate them on anxiety reducing modalities, or whether it's breathing or yoga or stretching, or as well as the dangers of Adderall or getting a Xanax on social media. So making them aware of this now. I mean, I know what they're learning in health class. It's so antiquated. So I'm curious about what your thoughts on any policy or curriculum change.
I mean, there's I think obviously a huge push towards social emotional learning. I know my uncle works for Cassell. They go into a lot of schools and they teach, meditation, breathing techniques. I wish it was more widely available. I think that they're trying to get that to become more widely available. I think there's plenty of things schools can do, but between that, the way that kids aren't moving as much, I think, as they used to, and also the food that they eat. There's so many different factors into that.
And they don't go outside and play.
Yeah.
They just don't go outside and play like we did. We would be in the woods or down the street and just running around, being with our friends, being in nature.
But I think what you can do as a parent, I know you've probably got a lot on your plate already, but I found that just when the kids were in school, going in and talking to the headmaster myself I wanted to start a character program in the school, and it is like, okay, well, hand it to me. I don't have time to develop it. And I went and did the research, got the program, implemented it in the school. I tried to get more community service in the school that would kind of bring kids outside of their bubble and into different communities. You can get the David Lynch Foundation brings meditation into public schools around the country, and they usually do it for free. There are other programs like that that can bring this in. Christina talking about social emotional learning. They can bring that. Teachers really want to learn social and emotional learning, and the programs start in kindergarten, preschool, and go up. You can bring in meditation teachers into the public school system. You could advocate, as I said, for a lot of anxiety, and we're learning, and in my Alzheimer's work, we're learning that food, as Christina said, is a great activator of anxiety. The sugar that's in the food that's offered, you can go
and
like—
attention issues, too.
And attention issues, exactly.
Yeah.
What kids are being fed has a lot to do with how depressed, and what we're eating has a lot to do with how we think, what information we can retain, how well our brains work or don't work. Unfortunately, this, I'm putting it on your plate, but I have found that that's where I've usually gotten things done, when I took it onto my plate and found another friend who could help me and help me and help me. And then all of a sudden you had a group of parents who were advocating, and then there was not a town hall, but a town hall per se. And then once some of the students get interested in the subject of changing the nutritional program, bringing in meditation, then it just takes off on their own. So activating the students, giving them the research, which is available, and then making it their thing that they can leave the school is usually really helpful.
I have to say, just also to add to that quickly, I mean, for me personally also, one of the best drugs I gave up was, or at least like put better boundaries with, was my phone. And I think that's like a huge thing. And I mean, obviously teenagers, I'm sure that's a whole other ball game that I couldn't even begin to tell you how to navigate that. But I do think that simply like putting your phone down and like going outside, even just visually looking at nature, at trees, I think that would be huge. If, again, maybe you could talk to people at the school to put some better boundaries around that.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here. It was so great.